Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everybody, on behalf of the Holocaust Museum LA. My name is Michael Morgenstern, and I'm an educator at the museum. And today you have the honor and privilege of listening to Dr. Raul Artal, a Holocaust survivor who will share his story with you. And afterwards, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. Before we begin, I would like to share a quick history of our museum. Holocaust Museum LA was founded in the early 1960s by a group of Holocaust survivors who wanted to make sure that the world would always remember and learn from this tragic history. They did this at a time when the Holocaust had only ended about 15 years earlier, and most survivors were not yet willing to relive their trauma, largely because the public was not yet ready to listen to them and their stories. Thanks to the courage and foresight of this group of survivors, we have what became the first and oldest Holocaust museum in the United States, always with a mission to commemorate, educate, and inspire future generations. We can't do the work that we do today without our survivor community, who still on a regular basis shares their stories with you to be able to engage directly with this history. Thank you so much, Raul, for joining us today and for sharing your story. To our audience, thank you for joining us, and afterwards you can use the Q&A box to ask questions, and we'll get through as many questions as possible. Thank you so much, Raul, and you may begin. So you can share your screen and start your PowerPoint.
Can you see me now?
Yes, we can see it. We can see you in your PowerPoint. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Sorry we cannot meet in person, but as you know, circumstances prevent us nowadays from meeting personally. Hopefully, I will have the opportunity sometimes in the future to meet with you. I'm going to share with you today a chapter of the Holocaust that is not commonly known about the Holocaust in Transnistria. And this is a map of Eastern Europe. Transnistria is currently a breakaway country, actually a strip of what it was during World War II. During World War II, Transnistria was territory occupied by fascist Romania at that time and awarded by Hitler as a prize for them joining Nazi Germany in the war against USSR, Soviet Russia. Currently, as I indicated, it's a very small strip and it's an unrecognized country. I was born in a cowshed in Bershad, Transnistria, and we'll talk a little bit about Bershad later on. And since Bershad was the largest extermination concentration camp in Transnistria at that time during World War II. I was born in hiding and kept in hiding about a year until the liberation of the camp. How did my parents get there? Between 1933 and 1940, more than 1,400 anti-Jewish laws were passed in Germany. And as you probably know, anti-Semitism was and remains pandemic and historically resulted in the destruction of the European Jews. It's important to point out that among the 6 million Jews that were massacred during World War II, there were 1.5 million children. And I would like to share with you a quote taken at the Nuremberg trials of the Nazis criminals, and in the words of Otto Ollendorf, who for a while had his command center in Bershad, where I was born, was quoted as saying the following: "The children were people who would grow, and surely being the children of parents who had been killed, they would constitute a danger no smaller than their parents. Thus, they have to be eliminated." 1.5 million to 2 million Jews were murdered in that part of Europe, and among them, as I said, close to 1 million children. Reason being is anti-Semitism, which is particularly important nowadays since this year, and we recently commemorated the Yom HaShoah, the day of the Holocaust. This year commemoration was of particular significance since 60% of the racial incidents recorded in the past year in the United States by the FBI were directed at the Jewish people. Information totally ignored by the media. What are the roots of anti-Semitism? There is the religious anti-Semitism, where Jews are held collectively responsible for the death of Jesus Christ. And this is for now a couple of thousand of years. Racial anti-Semitism, Jews were considered, and they are still considered by many, to be genetically inferior. And then there is another myth that all Jews are rich. And then the political anti-Semitism. Jews were considered to be communist and spread communism by the Nazis, and bourgeois, capitalists by the Soviet Russian communists. In 1942, at the infamous conference at Wannsee for the Nazi leadership, it was determined and decided that Jews had to be eliminated, and they should be eliminated through work, slave work. The Jews must be finished one way or another. Those that cannot work, just eliminate right away. The undesirable Jews and the Jewish people were labeled as subhuman, genetically inferior. And a note written by Hitler in his handwriting, Hitler to his commander Bowler and to his personal physician Karl Brandt, who committed to help in the elimination of all the Jews. They were charged with responsibility to extend the powers of specific doctors in such a way, Nazi doctors, that after the most careful assessment of their conditions, those suffering from illnesses deemed to be incurable may be granted a mercy death. Jewish during the Nazi period was considered an incurable disease, and Jews were considered to be genetically inferior. Ironically, in very large genetic studies nowadays, it was determined that the Ashkenazi Jews, which or the European Jews actually have less single gene disorders than the Northern European population to whom the Nazi Germans belonged. During World War II, the Nazi Germany had a very hard time identifying who was Jewish and who was partly Jewish. And one information that is not commonly known or even discussed is that IBM came to the assistance of Nazi Germany and invented the first computer. Some of you may still remember the punch card computer, and helped Nazi Germany in identifying as many as possible Jewish people or partly Jewish people. I highly recommend this New York Times bestseller book by Edwin Black, who was awarded numerous literary prizes. IBM and the Holocaust by Edwin Black. Immediately after Nazi Germany conquered Eastern Europe, believe it or not, it's hard to believe it, that 44,000 concentration, extermination camp, and incarceration sites were set up all over Europe. 44,000. And at the same time, as I mentioned a few moments ago, the Nazi Germany leadership passed 1,400 anti-Jewish laws. 1,400 anti-Jewish laws. A little bit about my family. My grandparents on both sides were highly educated and respected individuals. These are my grandparents on my mother's side. My grandmother, Sonia, had 9 children, and my mother was the youngest of 9. My grandfather, Israel Gitzis, was a pharmacist and a respected mayor of the city of Khotin in Bessarabia for many, many years. Both of them massacred during World War II, and we'll talk a little bit about the circumstances later during my sharing my family history. Here is my mother in the city of Chernovitz with one of her colleagues at the music conservatory in Chernovitz, a renowned music conservatory where my mother completed her advanced training in piano. She was appointed as a music teacher at the conservatory, and she also became a concert pianist at that time, and was predicted to have a great career in as a concert pianist. I share with you this photograph because this coat that she was wearing, I will share with you the story later on, saved my parents and my life later on. On my father's side, the Mittelmarks, my grandparents on my father's side, before World War I, lived in Vienna, Austria. At that time, during World War I, my grandfather was recruited into the Imperial Army and fought on the Russian front, where he fell a prisoner, then returned to Vienna a broken man. Ironically, Hitler, who at that time was also an Austrian resident, was rejected and found to be non-fit for medical service. Here is my father in the front row, just before the break of World War II, with his sister in the front row, his brother in the back, and his mother at their house in a village near Chernovitz. At that time, Chernovitz, the capital of Bukovina, was considered to be a major cultural town. In the words of the famous Jewish poet and his words, was considered to be the little Vienna, where his name was Paul Celan, and his words, Chernovitz was the people where books and people lived, a major cultural city. My wife's entire family in Poland was massacred during World War II, adults and children, and for one reason only, they were Jewish. These were the sites of the murder site, as I indicated, 44,000 in Europe, in Eastern Europe predominantly. And here is where Transnistria was, and we'll talk about Transnistria a little bit later. Here you can see grandmothers and children to be loaded in cattle wagons. In many places, like in Iași, the capital of Romanian Moldova, those cattle wagons were taken back and forth a few miles until people got suffocated in those wagons and died. This was one of the first attempts to mass murder in Germany, in the occupied territories of Nazi Germany. Here at Auschwitz, on her way to the gas chamber, a grandmother and her 3 grandchildren. While on one visit at Auschwitz, I came across this poster, which I cannot forget, and I have tears in my eyes each time I read it and share it. A testimony of Leon Greenman, a Jewish inmate at Auschwitz. We were bullied out of the train and stood waiting. A truck arrived, stopped near us, and on the truck were all the children, all the women and children. In the center, my wife was standing up with our baby. A picture I will never forget. All of them were supposed to have gone to undress and then to the gas chambers. 2 hours later, these people were ashes, including my wife and child. While visiting Auschwitz on one occasion, I took along my youngest daughter and the youngest granddaughter, Nava, and I caught this photograph while Nava was standing in front of this poster photograph where you could see mothers and their children on the way to the gas chambers. I could not think of what would have happened if my children and my grandchildren were there along with these people on their way to the gas chambers. This is a photograph that I took at Mauthausen concentration camp in one of the gas chambers. And what you can see on this wall are scratches, men and women trying to climb the gas chamber walls for the last gasp of air, climbing the walls, trying to climb the walls and get the last gasp of air before succumbing to the gases. At Mauthausen, at Majdanek, under this roof, the ashes of hundreds of thousands of Jewish victims. And we're all familiar with this commonly shared photograph from Auschwitz of belongings of people that arrived here by train, then taken to the gas chambers. And these are some of their belongings left on the by the train while they were on the way to the gas chambers. Another photograph that I have taken at Auschwitz was of this human hair. All women were shaved and their hair used to make carpets. Actually, here you can see a carpet made of human hair. Incidentally, at Hitler's bunker, they found a few carpets made of human hair. Here are glasses of men and women that were taken to the gas chambers and thrown in that thing. And here are the slaves, the Jewish slaves, just that were found to be fit for slave work, like my parents were found fit for slave work, and on a column before taken to the slave work site. My parents who were, and we'll discuss this later, who were taken to Transnistria, to a concentration place called Bershad, where I indicated I was born, in hiding. They worked as slaves, and they were used to dig trenches for the advancing Nazi Germany army, and later on the Durchstrasse D, on the Freeway D, which the Germans were building. Actually, the Jewish slaves were building for Nazi Germany, and that freeway was supposed to link the rich resources Ural to Eastern Nazi Germany. Not far from all these concentration camps and places, 44,000 of them, were cities populated by non-Jews, by people that were by and large aware what was happening not far from their town cities. Sooner or later, they were aware that Jewish people were taken to these places and disappeared. A few historical facts. Hitler's forgotten ally, the fascist Romanian dictator Ion Antonescu, occupied Bessarabia and Bukovina, areas right now in Western Ukraine, very much in the news. And as I indicated, Romania was rewarded with territory that they named Transnistria, beyond the river Dniester. Transnistria is territory between the rivers Dniester and Bug. About 110,000 Jews from Bessarabia and Bukovina, among them my parents, were forced out of their homes on death marches, and about 200 miles to Transnistria. During these marches, about half of the victims died. Einsatzgruppen D, the one that I mentioned before, under the leadership of Otto Lohendorff, found personally responsible for the murder of 90,000 Jews at the Nuremberg trials. His unit killed about 150,000 Jews in Bessarabia and Bukovina. It's estimated that in that part of the world that is now Western Ukraine, about 1.2 to 1.5 million Jews were murdered, and also local Ukrainian people, and we'll talk a little bit later on. It's a very convoluted and history that affected that part of the world. It's important to share with you the order of the day given by General von Reichenau just before invading those territories. The first city to be occupied was Storozhenets near Chernovitz. Storozhenets was my father's birthplace. It's right now in Western Ukraine and Moldova there. And Chernovitz, as I indicated, was the capital of Bukovina, the Little Vienna, where my parents were dating during prior to World War II, when they were taken to the concentration camp. And in the world of von Reichenau, the Nazi Germany army has to kill all the Jews just for revenge because they are subhuman. The Sixth Army, the same unit that I mentioned before under Otto Ollendorf, one of their first action was to kill 90 children at Bila Tserkava for one reason and one reason only, because they could grow up and they will constitute a danger no smaller than their parents. They killed also, the same unit killed 33,000 Jews at Babi Yar in a ravine near Kiev for one reason only, for revenge. Here you can see Jews on their way to a concentration camp. My grandparents, my parents could have been on one of these, have been on one of these marches. Here you can see Romanian soldiers, Ukrainian collaborators, and I must mention that there were collaborators with the Nazis all over Europe, including Ukraine, but the vast majority of the population was not. Here you can see mothers and grandmothers carrying their children and babies on their way to concentration camp. And you can see a Romanian, fascist Romanian soldier guarding this death march. However, elsewhere in Europe, occupied by Nazi Germany, their collaborators were celebrating the victories of the Nazi army. At Bogdanovka, one of the first cities to be occupied in Western Ukraine, a typhus epidemic erupted. The Nazi Germans and their allies, the fascist Romanian, locked up all the population in these barracks, and they burned them alive, A death march through the forest of Kazauts, which my parents were driven through. 12,500 Jews were forced through this forest. About 6,000 of them perished. Luckily, my parents survived. They were young and in good physical shape. Among those that were on that death march and also deported was a famous Israeli painter by the name of Arnold Dagani. And this is one of his artistic art rendition, a painting of a grandparent and his two grandparents in the forest of Kazauts on the way to the concentration camp. About every 15 miles or so, the Jewish people on the death marches were forced to dig trenches. They were then asked to undress, the clothing taken away, then distributed to the local Ukrainian or Nazi collaborators population, and then they were killed. And the next group of Jews that will come will cover those trenches. And here you can see a mass grave containing bodies of several thousand Jews in Proskurov, Ukraine. Some of the most horrible things happen on those death marches. Frequently, young women would be identified, ordered to undress. They will be paraded naked through those villages or towns, then raped by multiple soldiers, and then thrown alive in wood-burning limestone ovens that were very common in that part of the world, actually, to this day. And if they had any children, the children would be used for target killing, or like in the case of this poor young woman, her 2-year-old child, his head was beaten against the wall and killed on the spot. This is a famous photograph found at many Holocaust museums because of its significance. The Nazi German soldiers were under strict orders to save bullets and try to kill their victims with one bullet and one bullet only. And if they had a child, to position their child in such a way that with one bullet, both mother and child would be killed in fields of Ukraine. I highly recommend this book by Father Patrick Dubois, who I had the honor to personally know. He was the Vatican liaison to the Jewish communities around the world. And he wrote this book. He took upon himself a challenging project of going to all the mass murder sites in Western Ukraine. And he came up with the brilliant idea of recovering the bullets from these mass murder sites. And by counting them, we'll find out how many people were, how many Jews were murdered at each place. At his estimate, about 1.5 million Jews, among them hundreds of thousands of children, were murdered on the in Western Ukraine. Excuse me. In the words of Wall Street Journal, Father Dubois is a generation too late to save lives. Instead, he has saved memory and history. Here are Jewish people on the shore of the river Dniester. Across, this would be now, it would be in, as I said, in Western Ukraine. And across here, you can see Transnistria across the river Dniester. Here, Ukrainian Jews, maybe my parents somewhere around them, being deported to Transnistria in July of 41. My parents were deported late in October of 41. Convoys of deported Jews were marched to abandoned villages. Bershad was a half-abandoned village, and we'll talk about this later on. Those fit for slave work were kept alive. The others were died either by execution, typhus, which was rampant, hunger, since they were never fed. As I indicated before, they were given a cup of soup only when they worked digging trenches for the advancing Nazi German army or on the freeways there, or died from cold weather. This is Bershad, a photograph that I have taken, part of their Bershad, which is in the Vinica area, a little bit to the south of Kiev, southwest. Half of the village looks like that. And in 1941, approximately, among them my parents were taken there. 9,000 survived after first winter. By time of liberation, according to the claims conference, only 1,900 people survived, among them myself. This is another artist rendition by Arnold Argani of Jews standing near the fence surrounding their concentration camp in Bershad and exchanging clothes, whatever clothes they still had, with the local farmers for food. This is a photograph that I have taken in Bershad of the centuries old synagogue in Bershad. This is how it looks today. During World War II, about 200 Jews were in this structure, and many of them died, but this is where people hide in all these places. As I indicated to you before, this is also a very famous photograph found in the pocket of this soldier, a Nazi German soldier. And on the back of the photograph was written, "Last Jew in Vinica." And as I indicated before, Bershad was in the Vinica area. Near Vinica, the Nazi German army built a bunker for Hitler. Hitler was supposed to direct the assault on Moscow from that place. He visited the place only once, but as we know, the Nazi German army never reached Moscow. However, this photograph was found out in the pocket of this soldier. Vinica, who was the capital of the area where Bershad was also located, where I was born, was also known for several horrible massacres. In preparation for Hitler's visit, the Nazi soldiers killed all the Jews. But one of the most horrific things happened at the local maternity hospital. The soldiers went there and they asked for the Jewish mothers, which were identified. They were shot immediately. Then they asked for the Jewish babies. The Jewish babies were taken, placed into sacks and thrown from the second, third floor of the hospital into the street, just like unwanted kittens. Babies were born at all the concentration camps. Here are pregnant women at Auschwitz, and about 3,000 babies were born at Auschwitz, and a few of them that survived got together a few years ago at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. Most of the deliveries, if not all of the deliveries, they were assisted by a nun. Her name was Stanislava Lezhinska, who was an absolute angel. She tried to save as many as possible Jewish babies and also Jewish mothers. Many times, at her personal risk, she would place the newborn babies between the legs of the mothers, cover them with newspaper and whatever clothing there was still available, and send these mothers on gurneys to the barracks at Auschwitz. The guards, by and large, were afraid to go into the barracks because, as I indicated before, contagious disease were rampant, and the guards were afraid to go in. Here is the infamous killing squad D, Einsatzgruppe D, with Otto Ollendorf here in the front row to the left, found personally responsible for the murder of of 95,000 Jewish people, among them many children. And I must indicate that most of the members of these killing squads were highly educated individuals. Many of them had doctor's degrees in law. Otto Ollendorf had a doctorate degree in political science, and among them, among the killing squads, the head of the killing squad C, his name was Otto Rasch. Otto Rasch had 2 doctor's degrees, and he used to insist to be called doctor. They should have called him criminal. Jewish partisans helped the Red Army fight the Germans, and they were people that collaborated with the Jewish Ukrainian partisans in the area, among them my father. When the local killing squad found out that there were communication between people in the camp and the Ukrainian partisans, Jewish Ukrainian partisans, they found out that the liaisons were 2 teenagers. They tried to extract from them the names. They were tortured almost and then killed, and they found out some of the names of the Jewish collaborators in the camp. Among them was my father. And those people were taken out for execution. Also, my father was taken out for execution. And the execution occurred at the local cemetery. When they got to the local cemetery, my father noticed that there were tens of dead bodies on the ground, frozen ground at that time. And my father had the intuition to fall to the ground and to pretend to be dead. The guards did not notice, and that's how he escaped. He escaped the execution. This is another artist's rendition by Dagani of the mass grave cemetery in Bershad. This is a letter given to my father by Jewish partisans in recognition for his collaboration with them during World War II. This letter is on display at the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem at Yad Vashem. And this is an acknowledgement of the Holocaust Museum to my father for for donating this letter to the museum. This is how the Bershad cemetery looks nowadays. It's kind of a horrible shape, and it still has the monument commemorating and the memory of the victims, Jewish victims that were murdered at that location. It is estimated, as I said before, that 1.3 to 2.5 million perished in the Ukrainian camps during World War II. Exact number not known to this day. Among the survivors, there was a child. She was 11 years old, Ruth Glasberg-Gold. She became an orphan in Bershad, and she wrote a book about her horrible experience in Bershad. Ruth, I had the honor to know Ruth. She still lives in Miami, and this is her survivor memoir. Children survived in all the camps and ghettos, and unfortunately, many of them were discovered, captured by the Nazis, and sent to concentration camp where most of them were murdered. 1.5 million children. My parents, as I indicated, after the Stalingrad victory, Bershad was liberated in late in 1944. I was a toddler at that time, hidden in Bershad, and periodically the guards in Bershad, the Nazi and their collaborator, will search for babies in the camp to kill them and to kill the babies. Actually, they had this sport also to throw babies in the air and tried to kill them with one bullet. On one occasion, when they were searching for babies, my parents, my mother alone, had the intuition to run with me, and she did hide in the most unlikely place because she knew that the Nazi guard, the Nazi German guards, and also their allies at that time, the Romanian guards, would not search for, was in the backyard, excuse me, in the backyard of the Nazi commander house. He had a large backyard with a large garden with many bushes, and my mother hid there for 4 years, four nights, and then returned to the half-abandoned house where my father and other 10 Jewish people were sharing. She had to run with me several times, and also for food, they will usually dig into the ground and next to the those abandoned houses and recover whatever, some potatoes or sometimes leftovers, and that's how they survived. 1.5 million children murdered during the Nazi occupation. This is my father deportee identification card, and here is my name inscribed, Raul, where I was born. This is my only birth certificate, so to speak. After liberation, my parents came home to Chernovitz. There was no welcome home, and they were not allowed in their original homes. All of their belongings were confiscated by the communist regime and the people that took over those properties. And we lived on the 3rd floor of this house. When the communists started deporting the Jews to Siberia for being now capitalists, my parents ran into Romania. I was about 2 years old at that time. This is the first photograph taken of me. We lived in Romania for about 12, 13 years, and then we came to the States after many attempts. My mother had 5 brothers in the States. However, after about 6 months in the States, my parents, while walking in New York on a street of Madison Avenue, they saw a similar plaque on one of the restaurants, a small restaurant in one of these streets, and on the plaque was inscribed, "No dogs, no Negroes, no Jews." When my parents saw that, they decided to move to Israel. So we moved to Israel, where initially I worked in a kibbutz during the day, learned the language in the evenings. My biggest academic accomplishment to this time in life was to finish high school in Israel in a year and a half. I later on served in the military, where I married my future wife, Michal. We studied together. Actually, our decided to study medicine. We spent our pre-med school in Italy. So Italian was my sixth language or so. And then we finished medical school in Israel. We came to this country in 1973 for advanced training, and the multiple opportunities that came my way, I had a most successful career as a physician and teaching physician at several institutions. And this concludes my my presentation, and I would be happy to answer questions, but I would like to mention one fact that is known to very few, that most of the countries in Europe, there were those that collaborated with Nazi Germany. However, one country only in Europe that committed itself to save all its Jewish population was Denmark, who smuggled all their Jews to Sweden in the 43. And this is one of those rescuing Danish boats. It's sad to see that there is a resurgence of anti-Semitism everywhere in Europe and also here in our own country. And it's very regrettable to see that anti-Semitism is rampant on college campuses, media and politicians, and media never mentions anything about anti-Semitism, or rarely. I would like to conclude with the words of the Pope, who condemns the barbaric resurgence of anti-Semitism, and also in the words of Elie Wiesel, Holocaust survivor, known for his contribution to the fight against anti-Semitism and his publications. He was a journalist. In his words, we decided to tell the tale, and this is because we wanted the world to be a better world. And as Elie Wiesel said, for the survivor, like myself, it is clear his duty is to bear witness for the dead and for the living. He has no right to deprive future generations of a past that belongs to our collective memory. To forget would be not only dangerous, but offensive. To forget that death would be akin to killing them a second time. Elie Wiesel, I had the honor to know him, and he used to call me my friend. And Michael, if we have any time, I will be happy to answer any question that from the audience.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. If anybody has any questions, please use the Q&A box. And I would actually like to take down the screen so that we can see you better. Thank you so much for sharing your presentation and your story with us. When is the speaking about growing up, did you talk to other kids your age about what your family experienced?
Yes, actually, I did most of my schooling in Romania, who during World War II was a collaborator, an ally of Nazi Germany. And in my class there at the high school, there were two kids, the children of war criminals. one of them was a very nice child, just like everybody else. Actually, for a while, he was my friend, and we used to play together. And the other child was the son of a war criminal, and periodically he will call me dirty Jew, and we'll get into fist fights. But Romania, who prior to World War I had about 1.5 million Jews, currently they has a population of less than 3,000 Jews. Very few. There were massacres there during World War II in several locations. I had memories, and most of the memories after the war in Romania were negative memories, but that, as I mentioned during my sharing my story with you, anti-Semitism was epidemic and remains epidemic, and sadly, the media rarely mentions anti-Semitism, and the thing that is most worrisome, that young people in particularly college campuses practice or are anti-Semitic.
Thank you. How did you cope with your trauma?
Well, as I shared with you my journey, I was a toddler, and I have no recollection of what happened during my parents and my being in a concentration camp, being born there, and spend my toddler year there. However, it's important to point out that we cannot forget what happened during World War II, particularly because of the resurgence of anti-Semitism. How it influenced me, one thing that stayed with me is when my parents came out of the camp, the soldiers were under strict orders not to allow any of the refugees to come on their trucks or on their train wagons. However, my mother was able to convince some soldiers to allow my father and I and her to get on a truck just to the first train station. And while on the truck, one of the soldiers pulled out a piece of chocolate and gave it to me. And since I never had any solid food before, I made a grimace, and the soldiers started laughing. And one of them said to my mother, "Don't worry, he will grow up and become a great commander in the Red Army." And my mother, who was trained as a musician, she was a concert pianist, without missing a beat, said, "No, my son will become a doctor." And this story was repeated so many times to me that I had no choice but to become a doctor. But the one thing that I do also remember is that while getting to the first train station, soldiers did not allow my parents and other survivors to come into the wagons, but they allowed them to get on the roofs of the wagons. And on a moving train, my parents with a baby and with them, with the toddler, they were holding me, and then they reached Chernovitz, from where they were deported. And for many years, I used to have this nightmare that I fall off the roof of this train, and I will jump out of my bed and have this nightmare that I'm falling off the roof of the train. Actually, I had this nightmare into my adult life, but not in later years.
Thank you for sharing. What is your earliest memory?
These were my earliest memories that I just shared with you. And I certainly remember when we got to the town from where my parents were deported to Czernowitz, little Vienna. And as I indicated, they were not, my parents were not allowed into their original homes. I remember that going with my mother to her parents' house, and a woman came into the door and said, this house now belongs to the people. You are not allowed into the house. And I remember my mother asking, can I have at least a memento from my house? And the woman told her, get out of here, and closed the door in our face. So that's another memory I have.
You. Are you still practicing or teaching medicine?
Well, I'm now close to 80 years old. I retired about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I had a most successful academic career, but the thing that I valued the most is that I brought to life. I delivered about 3,000 babies of by and large women with medical and surgical complications of pregnancy. And I had the most rewarding academic career. I was a professor at USC for about 15 years, then in Syracuse, SUNY Syracuse for about 3 years. And then I was the chairman and professor at St. Louis University for 16 years or so, where we had a wonderful faculty that we are still in touch to this day. As I said, I had the most rewarding academic career and also a rewarding career as a obstetrician. And probably the reason why I went into obstetrics is because of my mother's difficult labor and delivery that she had with me. It was a complicated delivery. I came into this world with my feet first. It was a bridge delivery, which is considered a complicated delivery. Luckily, there was a physician there that was able to assist my mother in the camp. And here I am.
Thank you. Can you please remind us how you settled in the United States after you lived in Israel?
Well, I came for advanced training in this country. I finished my residency at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland. I had a advanced fellowship in maternal fetal medicine, medical and surgical complication of pregnancy at Harbor, UCLA, and then I was on the faculty at USC for, as I said, for 15, 16 years, and then upstate New York, and then I was the chairman of basically what became the equivalent of a women's hospital, a large Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at St. Louis University, where I practiced for 16 years before retiring. And as I shared with you during my talk, I did make a promise to Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust survivor, writer and speaker, that I will spend my years after my retirement by engaging in Holocaust education, by sharing my personal history. And also one other talk that I frequently give is about the role of physicians during World War II. One thing that is not commonly known, actually, I yet had to meet a physician that knows that the informed consent that you and I sign in a medical office before medical assistance or surgery originates at the Nuremberg trials of the Nazi physicians, where the judges basically mandated, they said, in their judgment against the Nazi physicians, that no medical or surgical procedure should be ever done without a consent, without a signed medical consent. And this is how the medical consent, where the medical consent originated. Sadly, very few people know that.
Thank you for sharing. Can you please share with us about your family today?
Well, my wife Michal now, my spouse for 57, 58 years. We had 3 children. 2 of them became also physicians, and the youngest one said that there are too many physicians in the family. She's an attorney. We have 8 grandchildren, so we have a happy family, and happy to share this detail with you.
Thank you. When did your parents pass away?
Both my parents passed away in Israel in the mid-70s. They were heavy smokers, both of them, which was quite common among people in Eastern Europe. And they both ended up having lung cancer, and sadly, they both died of lung cancer.
Were they able to get to know your children?
Yes, they. My father sadly knew only our older son and also our middle daughter. And sadly, he passed before we had our youngest daughter. He knew only one grandchild, our youngest and our daughters. And my mother knew 3 of our grandchildren.
Thank you. How are your family pictures preserved?
Well, how they survived. I think that the entire side of my family on my mother's side that was at that time in Bessarabia, now in Western Ukraine, perished during World War II. So I don't know. We were very lucky. We're very lucky to survive, and I think each time I share my personal history, I have tears in my eyes because I think about the 1.5 million Jewish children who did not survive, who were killed for one reason and one reason only: they were Jewish. I was very lucky to survive, and I feel it's my personal duty to share my life story with you and others. And this is a tragic page in the history of my people, the Jewish people, that this type of tragedy should never reoccur to anyone in the world. But sadly, as we see it continues to occur. We were witnessing now Russia invading Ukraine and massacring people just like Nazis did during World War II. Yes, there were collaborators with Nazis also in Ukraine. There were a few, among them Stefan Bandera, known as the collaborator, ultra-right nationalist. There were a few collaborators, but the vast majority of the population in Ukraine was not. And this is a big lie propagated by the Russians. And that's very sad to see what happens there. And the killing fields of Ukraine have become again killing fields.
Thank you for sharing. Is there anything that you attribute to your survival?
Well, I think it was my courageous parents that were able to hide me in a concentration camp, a slave labor concentration camp, an extermination camp. I think it was their determination to keep me alive. And as I shared with you before, there were other children that survived, Jewish children that survived during World War II. However, 1.5 million did not. So I attribute my survival to the determination and courage of my parents, that they did everything possible to keep me hidden under the most incredible and challenging situation and circumstances.
Thank you. To conclude, you speak on such a regular basis, primarily to students. What is something that you like them and anyone listening to you today to take away from learning your story?
Well, I think that a modern society, in a modern society, there is no place for hate. Hate in all its form because of one race, nationality, religion. We are all born equal, and equality should be a sacred vow that we all take. And it is during the years, schooling years, the children should be taught that we are all born equal and we should remain equal and respect each other.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, not just today, but all the times that you share this story and share this message with our future generations. We're so grateful to have you as a part of our community, to be doing this on such a regular basis and to be sharing with our audiences your family's story. Again, we're so grateful to have you as a part of our community. So thank you so much, Raul, and thank you so much to our audience for your attention and questions. Please come to visit the museum soon. You can look on our website for information, how to reserve a space to come and visit. We hope to welcome you here. And thank you again so much, everybody. Wishing you a happy, healthy, and safe week ahead. And we hope to see you next Thursday for our weekly Survivor Talk. Thank you.
Thank you.